World War I. A war that will take the world into the abyss of true horrors and death on a scale never seen before. An industrial-based type of warfare consuming any, and all, who dare step up to sheer unimaginable courage, in the face of horrific terror. We kick this channel off, with the Battle of Mons, the first major action of the British Expeditionary Force, in the First World War. Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914, and on the 9th of August, the BEF began embarking for France. Unlike continental European armies, the BEF in 1914 was exceedingly small. At the beginning of the war, the German and French armies numbered well over 1 million men each, divided into 8 and 5 field armies respectively. The BEF had under 80,000 soldiers in 2 corps of entirely professional soldiers, made up of long-service volunteer soldiers and reservists. The BEF was arguably the best trained and most experienced of the European armies of 1914, with British military training emphasizing rapid-fire marksmanship, with the average British soldier able to hit a man-sized target 15 times a minute, at a range of 300 yards with his Lee Enfield rifle, more than any other standard infantryman of another country at that time. This ability to generate a high volume of accurate rifle fire played an important role in the BEF's battles of 1914. The Battle of Mons took place as part of the Battle of the Frontiers, in which the advancing German armies clashed with the advancing Allied armies along the Franco-Belgian and Franco-German borders. The British Expeditionary Force would be stationed on the left of the Allied line, stretched from Alsace-Lorraine in the east, to Mons and Charleroi in southern Belgium. The British position on the French flank meant that it stood in the path of the German First Army, the outermost wing of the massive Reichshoek, intended by the Schlieffen Plan, in which German High Command planned to pursue the Allied armies, after defeating them on the frontier, and force them to abandon northern France and Belgium, or risk destruction. The British reached Mons on the 22nd of August, and in the afternoon of that same day arrived a message from the French Fifth Army commander, General Charles Lanrizac, sent to Field Marshal Sir John French, requesting the BEF to turn right, to attack General von Bülow's advancing flank. The French Fifth Army, located on the right of the BEF, was engaged with the German Second and Third Armies at the Battle of Charleroi. Field Marshal French refused, instead agreeing to hold the line of the Condé-Mons-Charleroi Canal for 24 hours, to prevent the German First Army from threatening the French left flank. The British would spend the day digging in along the canal. At the Battle of Mons itself, the BEF had some 80,000 men, comprising the Cavalry Division, an independent cavalry brigade and 2 corps, each with 2 infantry divisions. First Corps was commanded by Sir Douglas Haig and was composed of the 1st and 2nd Divisions. Second Corps was commanded by Sir Horace Smith Dorrien and consisted of the 3rd and 5th Divisions. Each division had roughly 18,000 men and 5,600 horses, in 3 brigades of 4 battalions. Each division had 24 Vickers machine guns, 2 per battalion, and 3 field artillery brigades with 54 18-pounder guns, 1 field howitzer brigade of 18 4.5-inch howitzers and a heavy artillery battery of 4 60-pounder guns. Second Corps, on the left of the British line, occupied defensive positions along the Mons-Condé Canal, while First Corps was positioned almost at a right angle away from the canal, along the Mons-Beaumont Road. First Corps was deployed in this manner to protect the right flank of the BEF in case the French were forced to retreat from their position at Charleroi. First Corps did not line the canal, which meant that it was little involved in the battle, and the German attack was faced mostly by Second Corps. The dominant geographical feature of the battlefield was a loop in the canal, jutting outwards from Mons towards the village of Nîmes. This loop formed a small salient which was difficult to defend and formed the focus of the battle. The first contact between the 2 armies occurred on the 21st of August, when a British bicycle reconnaissance unit encountered a German force near Oberg, and Private John Parr became the first British soldier to be killed in the war. The first substantial action occurred on the morning of the 22nd of August. At 6:30 a.m., the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons laid an ambush for a patrol of German lancers outside the village of Casteau, to the northeast of Mons. When the Germans spotted the trap and fell back, a troop of the Dragoons, led by Captain Charles Hornby, gave chase, followed by the rest of his squadron, all with drawn sabres. The retreating Germans led the British to a larger force of lancers, whom they promptly charged, and Hornby became the first British soldier to kill an opposing soldier in the Great War, fighting on horseback with sword against lance. After a further pursuit of a few miles, the Germans turned and fired upon the Irish cavalry, at which point the Dragoons dismounted and returned fire. Private E. Edward Thomas, a cavalryman and drummer, is reputed to have fired the first shot of the war for the British Army, hitting a German trooper. That same day, having used British reconnaissance planes along with Lanrazic's messaging to his army staff, the BEF's chief of intelligence, Colonel George MacDonough, warned Sir John French that 3 German army corps were advancing straight against them. The Field Marshal chose to ignore these claims, instead proposing to advance towards Soignies. Advancing towards the British was the German First Army, commanded by Alexander von Kluck. The First Army was composed of 4 active corps of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 9th Corps, and 3 reserve corps of the 3rd, 4th and 9th Reserve Corps, although only the active corps took part in the fighting at Mons. German corps had 2 divisions each, with cavalry and artillery accompanying. The First Army had the greatest offensive power of the German armies, with a density of 18,000 men per 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers of front, or about 10 per 1 meter. Late on the 20th of August, General Karl von Bülow, the Second Army commander, who had tactical control over the First Army while north of the Sambre, held the view that an encounter with the British was unlikely, and wished to concentrate on the French units reported between Charleroi and Namur, on the south bank of the Sambre. Reconnaissance in the afternoon failed to reveal the strength or intentions of the French. The Second Army was ordered to reach a line from Binche, Fontaine-l'Evêque and the Sambre the next day to assist the Third Army across the Meuse, by advancing south of the Sambre on the 23rd of August. The First Army was instructed to be ready to cover Brussels and Antwerp to the north and Maubeuge to the southwest. Kluck and the First Army staff expected to meet British troops, probably through Lille, which made a wheel to the south premature. Kluck wanted to advance to the southwest to maintain freedom of maneuver and on the 21st of August, attempted to persuade Bülow to allow the First Army to continue its maneuver. Bülow refused and ordered the First Army to isolate Maubeuge and support the right flank of the Second Army, by advancing to a line from Lessines to Soignies, while the 3rd and 4th Reserve Corps remained in the north, to protect the rear of the army from Belgian operations southwards from Antwerp. On the 22nd of August, the 13th Division of the 7th Corps, on the right flank of the Second Army, encountered British cavalry north of Binche, as the rest of the army to the east began an attack over the Sambre River, against the French 5th Army. By the evening the bulk of the First Army had reached a line from Silly to Thoricourt, Louvignies and Mignot. The 3rd and 4th Reserve Corps had occupied Brussels and screened Antwerp. Reconnaissance by cavalry and aircraft indicated that the area to the west of the army was free of troops, and that British troops were not concentrating around Courtrai, Lille and Tournai, but were thought to be on the left flank of the 5th Army, from Mons to Maubeuge. Earlier in the day, British cavalry had been reported at Casteau, to the northeast of Mons. A British aeroplane had been seen at Louvain on the 20th of August, and on the afternoon of the 22nd of August, a British aircraft en route from Maubeuge was shot down by the 5th Division. More reports had reached the 9th Corps, that columns were moving from Valenciennes to Mons, which made clear the British deployment but were not passed on to the First Army headquarters. Kluck assumed that the subordination of the First Army to the Second Army had ended, since the passage of the Sambre had been forced. Kluck wished to be certain to envelop the left flank of the opposing forces to the south but was again overruled and ordered to advance south, rather than southwest, on the 23rd of August. Late on the 22nd of August, reports arrived that the British had occupied the Canal du Centre crossings from Nîmes to Ville-sur-Aisne, which revealed the location of British positions, except for their left flank. On the 23rd of August, the First Army began to advance northwest of Maubeuge, to a line from Bessècles to Saint-Guillain and Jemappes, with the weather turning cloudy and rainy, which grounded the First Army, Fliegerabteilung, all day, despite an improvement in the weather around noon. News that large numbers of troops had been arriving at Tournai by train were received and the advance was suspended, until the reports from Tournai could be checked. The 9th Corps divisions advanced in 4 columns against the Canal du Centre, from the north of Mons to Reuis, and on the left flank, met French troops at the canal, which was thought to be the junction of the British and French forces. The German Corps commander, General von Quost, had ordered an attack for 9:55 am to seize the crossings before the halt order was received. The 2 3rd Corps divisions were close to Saint-Guillain, and General Ewald von Lockow ordered him to prepare an attack from Tertre to Glin. In the 4th Corps area, General 6th von Arman ordered an attack on the canal crossings of Péruls and Blayton, and ordered the 8th Division to reconnoiter from Tournai to Condé, and to keep contact with the 2nd Cavalry Corps. German air reconnaissance detected British troops on the 21st of August, advancing from Le Cateau to Malberge, and on the 22nd of August from Malberge to Mons, as other sources identified halting places, but poor communication and lack of systematic direction of air operations led to the assembly of the BEF from Condé to Binche being unknown to the Germans on the 22nd to the 23rd of August. British reconnaissance flights had begun on the 19th of August with 2 sorties and 2 more on the 20th of August, which reported no sign of German troops. Fog delayed flights on the 21st of August, but in the afternoon German troops were seen near Kortrijk and 3 villages were reported to be burning. 12 reconnaissance sorties were flown on the 22nd of August and reported many German troops closing in on the BEF, especially troops on the Brussels-Ninove road, which indicated an enveloping maneuver. 1 British aircraft was shot down and a British observer became the first British soldier to be wounded while flying. By the evening, Sir John French was able to discuss with his commanders the German dispositions near the BEF, which had been provided by aircraft observation, the strength of the German forces, and that the Sambre had been crossed, and that an encircling move by the Germans from Geraardsbergen was possible. During the battle on the 23rd of August, the air crews flew behind the battlefield looking for troop movements and German artillery batteries. At dawn on the 23rd of August, a German artillery bombardment began on the British lines. Throughout the day, the Germans concentrated on the British at the salient formed by the loop in the canal. At 9 a.m., the first German infantry assault began, with the Germans attempting to force their way across 4 bridges that crossed the canal at the salient. 4 German battalions attacked the Nimy Bridge, which was defended by a company of the 4th Battalion, Royal Fusiliers and a machine gun section led by Lieutenant Maurice Dees. Advancing at first in close column in parade ground formation, the Germans made easy targets for the riflemen, who hit German soldiers at over 1,000 yards, mowing them down by rifle, machine gun and artillery fire. So heavy was the British rifle fire throughout the battle that some Germans thought they were facing batteries of machine guns, and the German attack was a costly failure, with the Germans switching to an open formation and attacking again. This attack was more successful, as the looser formation made it harder for the Irish to inflict casualties rapidly. The outnumbered defenders were soon hard-pressed to defend the canal crossings, and the Royal Irish Fusiliers at the Nimy and Glyn bridges only held on with piecemeal reinforcement and the exceptional bravery of 2 of the battalion machine gunners. At the Nimy Bridge, Dees took control of his machine gun after the rest of the section had been killed or wounded and fired the weapon, despite being shot several times. After a 5th wound he was evacuated to the battalion aid station, where he died. Private Sidney Godley took over and covered the Fusilier retreat at the end of the battle, but when it was his time to retreat he disabled the gun by throwing parts into the canal, then surrendered after serious injury. Dees and Godley were awarded the Victoria Cross, the first awards of the First World War. An equally brave attempt was made by Captain Theodore Wright of the Royal Engineers, who attempted to blow up 5 of the bridges that crossed the canal in a 3-mile run. He managed to destroy the Gemaps Pass, but while setting up charges at Mariette he was struck in the head by a projectile fragment and had to retreat. Having retreated for a small while, he nonetheless tried again, protected by the cover fire of the Northumberland Fusiliers. However, he slipped and fell in the canal, being saved by a comrade and forced to give up the whole endeavour. For this action he was also awarded a Victoria Cross, but would be killed in action the following month, at Vailly. To the right of the Royal Fusiliers, the 4th Battalion, Middlesex Regiment, and the 1st Battalion, Gordon Highlanders, were equally hard-pressed by the German assault on the salient. Greatly outnumbered, both battalions suffered many casualties, but with reinforcements from the Royal Irish Regiment, from the Divisional Reserve and support from the Divisional Artillery, they managed to hold the bridges. The Germans expanded their attack, assaulting the British defences along the straight reach of the canal to the west of the salient. The Germans used the cover of fir plantations that lined the northern side of the canal and advanced to within a few hundred yards of the canal, to rake the British with machine gun and rifle fire. The German attack fell particularly heavily on the 1st Battalion, Royal West Kent Regiment, and the 2nd Battalion, King's Own Scottish Borderers, which despite many casualties, repulsed the Germans throughout the day. By the afternoon, the British position in the salient had become untenable. The 4th Middlesex had suffered casualties of 15 officers and 353 of other ranks killed or wounded. To the east of the British position, units of the German 9th Corps had begun to cross the canal in force, threatening the British right flank. At Nimy, Private Oscar Niemeyer had swum across the canal under British fire to operate machinery closing a swing bridge. Although he was killed, his actions reopened the bridge and allowed the Germans to increase pressure against the 4th Royal Fusiliers. Having returned from Valenciennes, Commander-in-Chief Sir John French was still convinced that an advance could soon be made. However, by 3 p.m., the 3rd Division was ordered to retire from the salient, to positions a short distance to the south of Mons, and a similar retreat towards evening by the 5th Division to conform. By nightfall, 2nd Corps had established a new defensive line running through the villages of Montreuil, Boussu, Wam, Pachurages and Frameries, with the Germans building pontoon bridges over the canal and were approaching the British positions in great strength. News had arrived that the French Fifth Army was retreating, dangerously exposing the British right flank, and at 2 a.m. on the 24th of August, 2nd Corps was ordered to retreat southwest into France to reach defensible positions along the Valenciennes-Malberge road. Sir John finally accepted that an advance would not be able to take place and admitted that a retreat had to be made quickly, else the consequences would be irreparable for the BEF. The unexpected order to retreat from prepared defensive lines in the face of the enemy meant that 2nd Corps was required to fight a number of sharp rearguard actions against the Germans. For the first stage of the withdrawal, Smith-Dorrien detailed the 15th Brigade of the 5th Division, which had not been involved in heavy fighting on the 23rd of August, to act as rearguard. On the 24th of August they fought various holding actions at Pachurages, Frameries and Ordregnies. During the engagement at Ordregnies, the 1st Battalions of the Cheshire and Norfolk regiments halted the German advance from Quievrain and Béziers until the morning of the 25th of August, despite being outnumbered and suffering horrific losses, and with the support of the 5th Brigade Artillery, they also inflicted many casualties on the advancing German regiments. An evening roll call of the Cheshire's 1st Battalion, who had not received a withdrawal order, indicated that their establishment had been reduced by almost 80%. Their refusal to fall back without orders led Smith-Dorrien to later state that on reflection the 1st Battalion Cheshires together with the Duke of Wellington's regiment had saved the BEF. At Wam, elements of the 5th Division faced a big attack. German artillery began bombarding the village at daybreak, and at 10 a.m. infantry of the German 3rd Corps attacked. Advancing in columns, the Germans were immediately met with massed rifle and machine gun fire and were mown down like grass. For a further 2 hours, soldiers of the Northumberland Fusiliers, 1st West Kents, 2nd Battalion, King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, 2nd Battalion, Duke of Wellington's Regiment, and the 1st Battalion, Bedfordshire Regiment, held off German attacks on the village, despite many casualties, and then retreated in good order to St. Vast. On the extreme left of the British line, the 14th and 15th Brigades of the 5th Division were threatened by a German outflanking move and were forced to call for help from the cavalry. The 2nd Cavalry Brigade, along with the 119th Battery Royal Field Artillery and L Battery Royal Horse Artillery, was sent to their aid. After dismounting, the cavalry and the 2 artillery batteries screened the withdrawal of the 14th and 15th Brigades in 4 hours of intense fighting. From the German perspective, on the 23rd of August, the German 18th Division of 9th Corps advanced and began to bombard the British defences near Mézières and Saint-Denis. Part of the 35th Brigade, which contained large numbers of Danes from northern Schleswig, got across the canal east of Nîmes with few casualties and reached the railway beyond in the early afternoon, but the attack on Nîmes was repulsed. The 36th Brigade captured bridges at Auberg against determined resistance, after which the defenders of Nîmes gradually withdrew. The bridges to the north were captured at 4 p.m. and the town stormed. General Ferdinand von Quast ordered the 18th Division to take Mons and push south to Cuismes and Messven. Mons was captured unopposed, except for a skirmish on the southern fringe, and by dark, the 35th Brigade was in the vicinity of Cuismes and Hayen. On higher ground to the east of Mons, the defence continued. On the front of the 17th Division, British cavalry withdrew from the canal crossings at Ville-sur-Aisne and Thieu, and the division advanced to the Saint-Symphorien-Saint-Ghislain road. At 5 p.m., the divisional commander ordered an enveloping attack on the British east of Mons, who were pushed back after a stand on the Mons-Givry road. By 11 a.m., reports from the 4th, 3rd and 9th Corps revealed that the British were in Saint-Ghislain and at the canal crossings to the west, as far as the bridge at Pomeroy, with no troops east of Condé. Intelligence reports from the 22nd of August had noted 30,000 troops heading through Douar towards Mons, and on the 23rd of August, 40,000 men had been seen on the road to Genlis south of Mons, with more troops arriving at Gemaps. To the north of Binche, the right flank division of the Second Army had been forced back to the southwest by British cavalry. In the early afternoon, the 2nd Cavalry Corps reported that it had occupied the area of Field Courtrai-Tournai during the night and forced back a French brigade to the southeast of Roubaix. With this report indicating that the right flank was clear of Allied troops, Kluck ordered 3rd Corps to advance through St. Ghislain and Jemappes on the right of 9th Corps and for 4th Corps to continue towards Hensis and Thules. 4th Corps was already attacking at the Canal du Centre, 2nd Corps and 4th Reserve Corps were following on behind the main part of the army. 3rd Corps had to advance across meadows to an obstacle with few crossings, all of which had been destroyed. The 5th Division advanced towards Terta on the right, which was captured, but then the advance on the railway bridge was stopped by small arms fire from across the canal. On the left flank, the division advanced towards a bridge northeast of Wasmuel and eventually managed to get across the canal against determined resistance, before turning towards St. Ghislain and Hornu. As dark fell, Wasmuel was occupied, and attacks on St. Ghislain were repulsed by machine gun fire, which prevented troops crossing the canal except at Terta, where the advance was stopped for the night. The 6th Division was counter-attacked at Glynn, before advancing towards higher ground south of Jemappes. The British in the village stopped the division with small arms fire, except for small parties, who found cover west of a path from Glynn to Jemappes. These isolated parties managed to surprise the defenders at the crossing north of the village, with the support of a few field guns around 5 p.m., after which the village was captured. The rest of the division crossed the canal and began a pursuit towards Frameries and Sipley but stopped as dark fell. 4th Corps arrived in the afternoon, as the 8th Division closed on Hensies and Thulen and the 7th Division advanced towards Ville-Pomereux, where there were 2 canals blocking the route. The 8th Division encountered the British at the northernmost canal, west of Pomereux, and forced back the defenders but then bogged down in front of the 2nd Canal, under machine gun fire from the south bank. The attack was suspended after night fell and the British blew the bridge. The 7th Division forced the British back from a railway embankment and over the canal, to the east of Pomereux, but was pushed back from the crossing. Small parties managed to cross by a footbridge built in the dark and protected repair parties at the blown bridge, which allowed troops to get across and dig in 400 meters south of the canal, on either side of the road to Thulen. Late in the day, 2nd Corps and 4th Reserve Corps rested on their march routes at La Hamide and Birgaz, after marching 32 and 20 kilometers respectively, behind the front, too far behind to take part in the battle on the 24th of August. In the mid-afternoon of the 23rd of August, 4th Corps was ordered to rest, as reports from the front suggested that the British defense had been overcome and the 1st Army headquarters wanted to avoid the army converging on Maubeuge, leaving the western flank vulnerable. In the evening, Kluck cancelled the instruction, after reports from 9th Corps reporting that its observation aircraft had flown over a column 3 kilometers long, moving towards Mons along the Malplaquet road. 2 more columns were seen on the Malplaquet-Genly and the Quevy-Genly roads. A large force was seen near Ascalise and cavalry was found further east, which showed that most of the BEF was opposite the 1st Army. It was considered vital that the 2nd Canal crossings were captured along the line, as had been achieved by 9th and part of 3rd Corps. 4th Corps was ordered to resume its march and move the left wing towards Thulen, but it was already engaged at the canal crossings. The 3rd and 9th Corps attack during the day had succeeded against a tough, nearly invisible enemy, but the offensive had to continue, because it appeared that only the right flank of the army could get behind the BEF. The situation remained unclear at the 1st Army headquarters in the evening, because communication with the other right flank armies had been lost and only fighting near Thun by 7th Corps, the right flank unit of the 2nd Army, had been reported. Kluck ordered that the attack was to continue on the 24th of August, past the west of Maubeuge, and that 2nd Corps would catch up behind the right flank of the army. 9th Corps was to advance to the east of Bavay, 3rd Corps was to advance to the west of the village, 4th Corps was to advance towards Warnes-le-Grand 10 kilometers further to the west, and 2nd Cavalry Corps was to head towards Denain, to cut off the British retreat. During the night there were several British counter-attacks, but none of the German divisions was forced back over the canal. At dawn 9th Corps resumed its advance and pushed forwards against rearguards until the afternoon, when it stopped the advance due to uncertainty about the situation on its left flank and the proximity of Maubeuge. At 4 p.m., cavalry reports led Quost to resume the advance, which was slowed by the obstacles of Maubeuge and 3rd Corps congesting the roads. On 3rd Corps front to the west, the 6th Division attacked Frameries at dawn, which held out until 10:30 a.m. and then took Le Bouvray and Peturages, after which the British began to retreat. The division turned west towards Warquignies and the 5th Division. St. Ghislain had been attacked by the 5th Division behind an artillery barrage, where the 10th Brigade had crossed the canal and taken the village in house-to-house fighting, then reached the south end of Hornu. A defensive line had been established by the British along the Dower-Wam Railway, which stopped the German advance and diverted the 9th Brigade until 5 p.m., when the British withdrew. The German infantry were exhausted and stopped the pursuit at Dower and Walqueatneys. During the day, Kluck sent liaison officers to the Corps headquarters, stressing that the army should not converge on Maubeuge but pass to the west, ready to envelop the British west flank. 4th Corps headquarters had ordered its divisions to attack over the canal at dawn but found that the British had blown the bridges and withdrawn. Repairs took until 9 a.m. and the 8th Division did not reach Quievrain until noon. The 7th Division reached the railway at Thun during the morning and then took Eluges late in the afternoon. As the 8th Division moved on, the vanguard was ambushed by British cavalry before an advance to Valenciennes could begin and then attacked a British rearguard at Béziers, which then slipped away to Ordregnies. The rest of the division skirmished with French territorials southwest of Béziers. The 4th Corps attack forced back rearguards but inflicted no serious damage, having been slowed by the bridge demolitions at the canals. The cavalry divisions had advanced towards Denain and the Jaeger battalions had defeated troops of the French 88th Territorial Division at Tournai and then reached Marchiennes, after a skirmish with the 83rd Territorial Division near Orchies. By nightfall on the 24th of August, the British had retreated to what were expected to be their new defensive lines, on the Valenciennes-Maubeuge road. Outnumbered by the German First Army and with the French Fifth Army also falling back, the BEF had no choice but to continue to retire, 1st Corps retreating to Landrecies and 2nd Corps to Le Cateau. The chaos and confusion were graphically illustrated in Landrecies on the 25th of August, where a senior officer apparently took leave of his senses and began firing his revolver down a street. The Great Retreat continued for 2 weeks and covered over 250 miles or 400 kilometers, with the British closely pursued by the Germans fighting several rearguard actions, including the Battle of Le Cateau on the 26th of August, the Étreux rearguard action on the 27th of August and the action at Nery on the 1st of September. Units disappeared and more guns were lost than at any time since the American War of Independence. Both sides had success at the Battle of Mons. The British had been outnumbered by about 3 to 1 but managed to withstand the German First Army for 48 hours, inflict more casualties on the Germans and then retire in good order. The BEF achieved its main strategic objective, which was to prevent the French Fifth Army from being outflanked but at great cost. The battle was an important moral victory for the British. As their first battle on the continent since the Crimean War, it was a matter of great uncertainty as to how they would perform. In the event, the British soldiers came away from the battle with a clear sense that they had got the upper hand during the fighting at Mons. The Germans appeared to recognize that they had been dealt a sharp blow by an army they had considered inconsequential. German novelist and infantry officer Walter Blum wrote, "The men all chilled to the bone, almost too exhausted to move and with the depressing consciousness of defeat weighing heavily upon them. A bad defeat, there can be no gainsaying it. We had been badly beaten, and by the English we had so laughed at a few hours before." For the Germans, the Battle of Mons was a tactical repulse and a strategic success. The staff at Kluck's headquarters claimed that the two-day battle had failed to envelop the British, due to the subordination of the army to Bülow and the Second Army headquarters, which had insisted that the First Army keep closer to the western flank, rather than attack to the west of Mons. It was believed that only part of the BEF had been engaged and that there was a main line of defense from Valenciennes to Barbès, which Kluck ordered to be enveloped on the 25th of August. The First Army was delayed by the British and suffered many casualties but crossed the barrier of the Mons-Condé Canal and began its advance into France. The Germans drove the BEF and French armies before them almost to Paris, before being stopped at the Battle of the Marne. J. E. Edmonds, the British official historian, recorded just over 1,600 British casualties, most in the 2 battalions of the 8th Brigade which had defended the salient, and wrote that German losses must have been very heavy. John Keegan estimated German losses to have been around 5,000 men. In 1997, D. Lomas recorded German losses from 3,000 to 5,000 men. In 2009, historian Holger Herwig recorded 1,600 British casualties and around 5,000 German casualties, despite the fact that Kluck and Kuhl did not reveal First Army casualties. Post-war German records estimated 2,145 dead and missing and 4,932 wounded in the First Army from the 20th to the 31st of August. Using German regimental histories, Terence Suber gave no more than 2,000 German casualties. The Battle of Mons has attained an almost mythic status. In British historical writing, it has a reputation as an unlikely victory against overwhelming odds, similar to the English victory at the Battle of Agincourt of 1415. Mons gained two myths, the first being the miraculous tale that the Angels of Mons, angelic warriors sometimes described as phantom longbowmen from Agincourt, had saved the British army by halting the German troops. The second one was the Hound of Mons, which alleged a German scientist engineered a hellhound to be unleashed on British soldiers at night. Soldiers of the BEF who fought at Mons became eligible for a campaign medal, the 1914 Star, often colloquially called the Mons Star, honoring troops who had fought in Belgium or France between the 5th of August to the 22nd of November 1914. On the 19th of August 1914, Kaiser Wilhelm allegedly issued an order of the day which read in part, "My soldiers, to exterminate first the treacherous English, walk over Field Marshal French's contemptible little army." This led to the British Tommies of the BEF proudly labeling themselves the Old Contemptibles. No evidence of the order of the day has been found in German archives, and the ex-Kaiser denied giving it. According to the controversial book Falsehood in Wartime, an investigation conducted by General Frederick Morris traced the origins of the order to the British GHQ, where it had been concocted for propaganda purposes. The Germans established the St. Symphorien military cemetery as a memorial to the German and British dead. On a mound in the center of the cemetery, a grey granite obelisk 7 meters, 23 feet tall was built with a German inscription, in memory of the German and English soldiers who fell in the actions near Mons on the 23rd and the 24th of August 1914. Originally, 245 German and 188 British soldiers were interred at the cemetery. More British, Canadian and German graves were moved to the cemetery from other burial grounds, and more than 500 soldiers were eventually buried in St. Symphorien, of which over 60 were unidentified. Special memorials were erected to 5 soldiers of the Royal Irish Regiment believed to be buried in unnamed graves. Other special memorials record the names of 4 British soldiers, buried by the Germans in Oberg churchyard, whose graves could not be found. St. Symphorien Cemetery also contains the graves of the 2 soldiers believed to be the 1st, Private John Parr, 4th Battalion, Middlesex Regiment, the 21st of August 1914, and the last, Private Gordon Price, 28th Canadian Infantry Regiment, the 11th of November 1918 Commonwealth soldiers to be killed during the First World War. A tablet in the cemetery sets out the gift of the land by Jean Houzeau de la Haye. A bronze tablet was erected on a wall of Oberg railway station, commemorating British soldiers who lost their lives around Oberg, including an unnamed soldier who is said to have stayed behind at the cost of his own life, perched atop the station, in order to cover his withdrawing comrades. Thank you for watching GK, The Battle of Mons. Subscribe for plenty more to come.